afternoon, good evening, whenever, wherever you are listening. Thank you so much for making me a part of your day. My name is Lee Parr. You might know me as Lego Lee or Lego Lee 329 from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, you name it. I'm all over the internet, and this is the Brickology podcast, the study of small plastic bricks. How are you doing today? I sincerely hope you are having a fantastic day and an even better week. And when I say that, I really mean it, because the world is in a crazy place right now. I've been struggling a lot, and I think a lot of people have really been struggling, and it just feels like we're kind of hitting rock bottom as a world, as a planet in total. And I really hope that you guys are being able to stay positive during this increasingly dark time. And I hope that Brickology, even though it's a casual, fun Lego podcast, I hope that this podcast can help spark some joy in you, and that you learn something and you enjoy listening to this podcast. And I have been getting so much feedback as of late. Emails, direct messages, comments, you name it. You guys are really supporting this podcast, and that's what keeps me going. And I'm over 7,500 streams, and we've finally hit 100 followers on Spotify. Now, I still think that follower count seems really skewed. Like, if I have 7,500 people listening, but only 100 people following, I mean, come on. If you're listening to this podcast, if you listen to this podcast multiple times, just follow me on Spotify. You'll get updated when I upload new episodes, and it really helps me out. So find me on Spotify. And before we get started, I have to throw in the shameless plugs from my other various accounts. You can follow me on Instagram. I literally post daily content on Instagram. I have like 11,000 some odd followers over there. Check me out on Instagram. I also have a Facebook page you can like. You can follow me on my Twitter account. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you really love me, if you really love the podcast, you love Lego Lee, you love Brickology, you can maybe support me on Patreon. I have a pretty underwhelming amount of Patreon supporters. I have a decent bit, but I make very little money, and like $1, literally $1 a month will go a very long way to helping support this podcast and supporting what I do. So that would be a humongous help if you could go support me on Patreon. But now it's time to get into today's episode of Brickology. Not too many announcements for today. I just needed to kind of clarify what I talked about a little bit last week. So last week's episode of Brickology was my second consecutive episode of Brickology that was about a licensed Lego theme. And if you're a fan of the podcast, you would know, but if you are a first-time listener, I'll explain this real briefly. I had been alternating doing weeks where I did a licensed theme, like Lego Star Wars, and the next week would be an unlicensed theme, like Lego Ninjago. The first episode of Season 3 a couple weeks ago was about Solo, a Star Wars story, and then I immediately did a Lego Super Mario episode because I wanted to get that episode out as quickly as possible. So I did 2 straight licensed theme episodes. That is not going to be the new norm with Brickology. I want to get that pattern back up and running. So to make up for doing 2 licensed themes, the next 2 episodes, including today's, will be unlicensed themes. So this week is an unlicensed theme, next week will be an unlicensed theme, and then episode 5 of this season will be a licensed theme, and the pattern will continue from there, and it should be continuing in that way for the foreseeable future. So those are all the announcements of today's episode out of the way. Let's jump into this week's theme. So this week we are traveling back in time 24 years into the past to talk about the Lego theme known as Lego Time Cruisers. Now, if you're a fairly new fan of Lego or a younger fan of Lego, you might be like, Lee, what the heck is Lego Time Cruisers? And I don't blame you if you're unfamiliar with this theme. This is the one and only Lego theme that focuses on time travel. And of course, this is an unlicensed original in-house Lego theme. They have made stuff from, like Avengers Endgame, Back to the Future, Doctor Who, that deal with time travel, but this is the only original Lego theme ever as this kind of gimmick for a storyline. And speaking of time travel, this is one of the oldest themes we've ever covered here on Brickology. Technically, the oldest theme we did was Pirates, we did towards the end of Season 1. Pirates started in 1989, but this is number 2 because this theme first came out in 1996, which is before my time. I was born in 1997, so this theme is older than me. And there's actually some weird backstory of how this Time Cruisers theme came to be. So we'll explain that here right now. The year is 1994, 2 years before the theme is actually officially released, and a LEGO fan built a model of a car that was also a time machine, kind of similar to the DeLorean from Back to the Future, but a little bit more on the wacky side of things, and sent it to LEGO magazine. And LEGO loved the concept of this car, that they literally took that and developed a story with original characters around that, and those characters became the Time Cruisers comic in the LEGO magazine in the mid-1990s. For those of you who grew up with like LEGO Club magazine, I honestly don't even know if they do that anymore. My subscription ended years ago at least, but I used to really look forward to getting these magazines when I was a kid, and they always had various comics of sorts. So Time Cruiser was originally a comic strip in the LEGO magazine in the mid-1990s, and the theme kind of spun off from that comic a couple years later. But it's super interesting that this theme first started off as a comic strip and then became a LEGO theme. That's very odd. It's something I haven't really heard of on Brickology before. Usually it's the other way around, but this one, that's how that started. And this is also the first ever LEGO theme to have specifically named characters. I've mentioned this a couple times on Brickology with other themes like Adventurers and Rock Raiders, how those are some of the earlier themes to have named characters, but this is the first LEGO theme that has specifically named characters, which is super interesting. And what is the plot of Time Cruisers, you may ask? Well, let's jump into that right now. So the following plot description I found on Brickpedia. It says this comes from the LEGO catalog, and it also was on lego.com back in the day. And it reads as such: the LEGO Time Cruisers sets will give you a chance to travel through time anytime. Imagine navigating your vehicle through the depths of time, visiting other places past and present to complete your top secret mission. Careful though, as you never know who or what you'll meet. Most importantly, remember to get back home, or you could be trapped in time forever. So that's a little fun description of Time Cruisers, and the very interesting thing here is Time Cruisers is actually divided into two different factions. You have the good guys and the bad guys. The good guys are called the Time Cruisers, and here's a description of them. The Time Cruisers are the protagonists of the theme and were introduced in its initial release in 1996. Dr. Cyber and his assistant Timmy are the main characters in this faction, and they visit other ages to gather knowledge and repair damage wrought by the Time Twisters, which appeared the following year. And we'll talk about them here in just a second. They also have other members, a robot named Cranky and a monkey named Ingo. Their primary objective is to remain undercover and meddle as little as possible with history. So those are the main Time Cruisers, and obviously, you know, Dr. Cyber and Timmy are probably a riff on Doc Brown and Marty McFly from Back to the Future, but LEGO kind of made their own versions of those characters. Speaking of the bad guys, we have the Time Twisters. The description of the Time Twisters is this: the antagonists of this theme are called the Time Twisters. The Time Twisters are twins Tony Twister and Professor Millennium, who are accompanied by the mysterious ghost and a skeleton. Their vehicles are powered by cylinders filled with valuable artifacts from the past. They travel through time to steal objects of value to add to their cylinders and interfere with the past. So, very interesting little descriptions here of the various storylines and characters throughout the Time Cruisers / Time Twisters line, and we'll talk more about the differences in those names relating to the sets here in just a second. But without further ado, let's actually talk about the sets from this theme. So, as I mentioned earlier, this theme began in 1996, and there was an additional wave in the year of my birth, 1997, and the waves were actually divided up and marketed as two different themes. In 96, you had the Time Cruisers sets for the good guys, and in 97, you had the Time Twister sets for the bad guys, and they had a different logo and everything, and if you weren't, the wiser to this, you would think it actually were two different themes, which is kind of interesting, and I can't really think of LEGO doing anything quite like this before. It kind of reminds me, though, of like LEGO Bionicle back in the day, where they would release the TOA and then the bad guys in a separate wave. So you have like this wave of 6 TOA, and then the summer you might have a wave of 6 bad guys. They used to do that a lot with LEGO Bionicle, which was kind of interesting. That's kind of the closest thing I can think of from LEGO's standpoint of completely dividing and segregating sets down the middle between the protagonists and the antagonists, with a full year in between their release. But without further ado, let's actually start talking about the 1996 sets for the Time Cruisers. So the first first Time Cruiser set we'll talk about here is called the Rocket Racer. This set retailed for $4.50, not rounded up or anything. That was the actual price of this set, and it had 58 pieces. The figure included with this set here is Timmy, of course, one of the main characters of this line, and the build was the aforementioned Rocket Racer, which was a trike style vehicle that had 3 wheels, and it had 2 jet engines on the side, and the back section had another big engine with flames shooting out the back, and it had a couple of small quote-unquote propellers on the top, which were actually like the boat propellers, so very small little propellers. And that all probably made no sense to you. And if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast and you don't know what these sets actually look like in real life, I would seriously suggest going on either Brickset, Google, or Brickopedia and looking up these sets, because all the builds in this series really don't make any sense. They're a complete hodgepodge of just random stuff from completely different eras, which I guess kind of makes sense because it's Time Cruisers, but it also is just incredibly wacky. It literally just, it doesn't make sense. So it's all pretty much crazy, and I just ask you guys to roll with the craziness of this theme. So that's a very small set. Getting to some of the bigger sets, the $22, first off, the prices for this theme are all over the place, and they're super weird and specific numbers. It's very odd. You know, I've seen $15 Lego sets. I've seen $20 Lego sets. I've seen $25 Lego sets. $22? Like, that is so oddly specific. I don't know why this set cost $22. I don't know why the last set cost $4.50 and not just either $4 or $5. It's very weird, and it almost seems like Lego just forgot to round numbers with the prices of these sets. But the $22 set with 157 pieces here is referred to as the Hypno Cruiser. This set included Timmy, Dr. Cyber, and you also got Ingo the Monkey, and the build of this set was a time-traveling car, which I'm going to go ahead and guess was kind of an inspiration from that original car that I mentioned earlier on in this episode. And this car has almost a hot rod type, appearance to the front with an exposed engine, and then the back is where things get out of control. There's a couple of seats in the cockpit to fit figures. You have a big propeller in the middle, and then there's some dragon wings at the back, and they also have space to store all of these various headdress, helmet, and hat accessories. Now, the importance of those is the various accessories, like a knight's hat or a ninja mask or something. The reason they have all of these in these sets is because whatever hat you use is actually what powers the time machine to take you back to that specific time. So that's a weird little fun detail of how they, time travel in this universe. This is a pretty cool set. It has a very unique look to it, but it is suitably wacky. The next set from this line here is the Flying Time Vessel. This set is $44. Again, so weird. Why wasn't it just $45? I just don't understand the price points for these sets. This set had 237 pieces, and the figures were the exact same, literally the same figures as the last set, which is pretty boring. Now, the build of this set here is a flying boat that has a dragon head at the front and some dragon wings towards the back. Then it has like plane style wings in the middle, but it looks like a boat, and it has a boat hull and a very modern style boat cockpit, kind of similar to like the shrimp boat style of cockpit we saw from the Hidden Side set last year. Kind of that sort of boat cockpit, something you'd see in a Lego City set. But then it also has a big pirate's mast in the middle, like it's a pirate ship. This is so bizarre and so out there. It's like a hodgepodge of different kinds of boats throughout history, plus an airplane, and it has wheels that it can land on. I mean, this thing makes absolutely no sense. And like I said, if you're just listening to the audio version of this podcast, look this up, because I don't know if my words are going to accurately explain how ludicrous this design is. And interestingly enough, this set was voted on by my fans on Instagram as the best Time Cruisers set. Now, when I say a set is voted on, I literally mean that. I post a sticker on my Instagram story before the episode, before I write the script for the episode, and I ask, what is the best set from this theme? And normally I get dozens of responses. However, Time Cruisers is a pretty obscure theme, and I think a lot of you guys are just unfamiliar with Time Cruisers in general. I literally got only 5 responses. One of the responses was blank. One response said Time Cruisers sucks. One response said, what is Time Cruisers? And the other two responses referenced this set. So kind of by default, because it's the only set that actually got specific mentions, this one won the best Time Cruisers set. It's not my personal favorite Time Cruisers set. I actually think my favorite set from this whole theme is in the Time Twisters wave, and we'll talk about that later on in today's episode of Brickology, but kind of funny that this set did win, even though I'm not really sure that had, earned that victory. Now, the biggest set from the Time Cruisers line in 1996 was the $64, again with just the whack price points here, the 504-piece $64 Magic Mountain Time set. It's the only play set from this line. The figures in this set here, the same ones that came with the last set, plus you get that robot guy I mentioned earlier in the theme. So yeah, pretty boring figure selection. They really didn't mix up the characters or anything. And it's very strange to me that because of the divide between the protagonists and the antagonists getting just completely separate waves of sets here, that if you got one of these sets at 96 and the Time Twister sets weren't even out yet, like, what do you do? Like, how do you play with them? You have nothing for them to fight. So that, I think, was kind of a weird missed opportunity on LEGO's part. I mean, like, when they make a set for, like, a new action theme, like Ninjago or Monkey Kid, for example, usually they throw in bad guys in the good guys sets or good guys in the bad guys sets, so you have something to fight, but these sets have absolutely none of that. Now, this is the biggest set from the entire theme, I believe. It's the only play set from the entire theme as well, and it's divided into a few separate sections. One section is a very medieval looking building. It looks very similar to things from LEGO Castle throughout the 1990s or even the 1980s, and it has a large turret on the top that I'm not sure if this turret's supposed to be like a laser cannon or maybe just like a big light. It could just be like a lighthouse style light. The middle section here has a flying house that can be detached because, why not? And the background has a very islandy sort of thing, which I believe 96 was also the same year that the Pirates sub-theme for Islanders came out. So LEGO was really on this island kick in the mid-90s. And this had a lot of big, ugly rock pieces making up kind of a mountainish landscape, and you had a palm tree as well. And finally, the final section here had a very underwater base type feel, similar to things like Aquazone from LEGO in the 90s, and had these big transparent orange pieces, and it had some like underwater gear and stuff. So very different things, but a pretty cool play set and a pretty cool big flagship, even though it was technically a base set for this Time Cruisers theme. Jump forward in time a year to the year 1997. I am now alive, and the follow-up line to Time Cruisers, Time Twisters, the sets for the antagonists of this theme, are starting to come out. And the first set from this line is the $10, yes, a $10 set, a completely normal LEGO price with 81 pieces. This is the Time Tunnellator, very interesting word. And the figure included with this set here is the arch nemesis of the Time Cruisers, or one of the arch nemesises of the Time Cruisers. You have Tony Twista. Now, when I hear the name Tony Twista, I feel the need to say that name with a very horrible, like mobster New York Italian style accent. And this marks the second episode of Brickology in a row that I'm doing a horrible impression of an Italian style accent. Hopefully that is not a recurring thing on this podcast, but the build for this set here was a flying vehicle. It had a couple of wheels at the front, and it's very, it felt very inspired by the Fright Nights theme, which was a castle sub-theme from the 90s that I'll probably do an episode of about on Brickology at some point in the future. It had these vinyl pieces for these wings. It looked kind of like a big bicycle or like an old style plane, but had like these kind of bat wing aesthetic, and you could push this vehicle on the ground, the wheels would spin, and there was this gear mechanism with rubber bands that would also make the propeller at the front spin and make the wings flap up and down. And this is the only set from this entire line that I personally own myself. I don't remember why I purchased this set, but I definitely randomly ordered this set off Bricklink 10 years ago or something, because I thought it looked cool, and I just ended up buying it off Bricklink. I remember it being a very, very fun set when I was younger, and I still wish I had it built to this day. And you know what? After when I'm editing this episode, I'll probably end up going on eBay and Bricklink and looking at some LEGO Time Cruiser sets for sales, because I would definitely love to have a couple more of these in my collection. Next up from the Time Twisters line for $22, back to the weird price points, another $22 set with 147 pieces, is the Whirling Time Warper. This set includes Professor Millennium and Ghost. Very creative name for the Ghost. His name is Ghost. I really love that name. And this is a flying vehicle that has a bubble-style cockpit at the front. That has a couple of bugle horns off to the side. I thought that was kind of an interesting little touch for LEGO to include there. And the back has the cylinder, which is what powers their time travel, with various artifacts inside of it. And the vehicle can roll on the ground. And similar to the last one, when you roll on the ground, it activates a very unique play feature with gears and little shifts and things like that. So basically, what this one did is when you rolled it on the ground, it had these like kind of pipe cone designs where these skeleton heads wearing top hats would go up and down. Very fun, kind of like whack-a-mole-ish design. It would also spin around the cylinder and spin a propeller that was at the back of the vehicle. So yet again, a really cool geared mechanism for this particular set. And now we have the biggest set from the Time Twisters line with the price point of $38.50. That's the winner. That is the weirdest price point I have ever seen on a LEGO set. Why was this not just $40? Like seriously, I honestly wish it cost more so the price point made more sense. $38.50 is so utterly bizarre. I just do not understand that price point whatsoever. The figures included with this set were Tony Twista, Professor Millennium, Ghost, and you also got the exclusive Wizard skeleton, which is kind of a fun little character. It was literally just a skeleton piece with a beard and a wizard's hat. And the build for this set is a flying train with 3 cars. This flying train, if you're familiar with the Monster Fighters line, which I will be doing an episode of that around Halloween time, so look forward to that. But if you're familiar with the Monster Fighters line, the Ghost train from that, I think, is kind of like a remake of this set. This is kind of like the original Ghost train to me. So it had this flying train with 3 cars. Now the train was flying, but you could also still put it on a normal LEGO train track system and it would function in that regard as well if you so choose to do that. So of course you had the engine of the train, which had a couple of seats in the cockpit to be piloted, and it had a really big, like a comically oversized smokestack with flames flying out the top. I'm pretty sure if the smokestack of your train has flames coming out of it, you probably need to get that checked out, because I don't think trains are supposed to do that, but it's a fun little detail that LEGO included here. You also had the next car, which is referred to on Brickology as the observation car, which again is very Fright Nights inspired. In fact, it was actually so Fright Nights inspired that it literally included the Fright Nights shield, which I think is pretty interesting. I love it when LEGO does these weird like interconnectivity things between themes. I really do enjoy little like Easter eggs of that sort. And this one it had kind of like a Western looking balcony section. It had, those like, I'm talking about the LEGO brick that kind of looks like the weird breadstick that comes with Chex Mix. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? It's like got like 4 little sections and it kind of looks like wood or Lincoln log style of texture. It had that kind of texture, and there's a balcony towards the back, and there's also a tower that spins around on top when the train wheels are rolling, so a fun little gear mechanism as well. And finally, the back car of this train is referred to as the Ghost car. Again, very Fright Night inspired, and this one is just very castle inspired as well, because the whole thing kind of looks like a castle turret, and it has like the castle roof kind of design, and it's completely black, so that's where the Fright Nights inspiration kind of comes from. And there's also an elevated platform on the back where a character can sit. And that is it, y'all. This has been one of the shorter episodes of Brickology. There's not a ton to cover with this theme, but that is it. I really hope you learned something about Time Cruisers / Time Twisters, this very obscure LEGO theme. And very odd to me how these sets were completely divided between good and bad guys. And would you guys like to see this sort of theme again? Like I said, this is the one and only original LEGO theme that kind of taps on the whole time travel thing. They've done so much other fantasy kind of stuff in the past. I would love to see LEGO give a stab at this sort of thing again. It's a trope in fantasy they haven't really touched since, and I would love to see a remake of sorts and kind of a reimagining with more modern LEGO pieces how this theme could look in modern day LEGO. So that's all, guys. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Brickology. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, find me online. If you have any questions for me, shoot me an email, legolee329@gmail.com. I try to reply to any emails I get. Shoot me an email on there. Or if you don't want to email me, find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, wherever, YouTube even. You can shoot me a direct message as well. I try to reply to everything that I get as long as it's a pretty normal question. And remember, next week will also be an unlicensed theme, and then the pattern will return after that. Thank you all so much for listening to today's episode of Brickology. I hope you had a great time listening, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day and week. Peace out, y'all. Bye-bye.